Volume 7 C55. Brain looked down at the girl who was by his knees. Her body was still. He no longer held his hand over the wound. I killed her. You said don't and I didn't listen. I've never. I was trying to save her, she said from over his shoulder. Brain didn't look up at her. You didn't know. You couldn't have known what I even meant. It was an accident, just bad luck. This kind of thing happens every single day. Just don't think about it. Don't think about it at all and it gets a whole lot easier. Don't. You mean forget what happened? She asked, aghast. How? She was just a. Brain looked over his shoulder at her, a runaway slave that died by a monster. You think she's the first one? There's a reason most don't run away, there's a reason most don't make it. There's a reason beyond just the half-elf slave catchers. It's because close to the border, the monsters ironically enough, help keep the prey in. I didn't know, she said in a tiny voice. Yeah, I know, there's a lot you don't know. Brain retorted. That's for damn sure. She's eyes narrowed, going from the girl to the kneeling swordsman. What the hell does that mean? I'm sorry, she demanded, and then kept her eyes on the pale body. We'll get her over the border and bury her there, Brain said, and with a trembling hand, he brought his fingers over her eyelids and began to close them. I can do that much for her. Brain. You might have to wait on that burial, she said, her eyes widening ever so slightly. What do you mean? He asked, his eyes following the half-elf warrior as she came around to crouch on the opposite side of the fallen girl. She's not dead. She answered and pointed to the trickle of blood that was still oozing from the wound. Brain snapped his eyes to the ugly gash in Layali's thigh. He took a close look, tearing away a clean part of his shirt. He shoved the cloth into the wound, wiped the blood clean, and sure enough, a very slight oozing of crimson continued to dribble into that spot. Get my pouch. Brain barked the order as if to one of his old idiot bandits, but Zeshi, far from showing umbrage, quietly did his bidding, though she moved with all the speed she could muster, so it was back in his hand before he could even finish extending his arm to take it. He thrust his hand within after tearing open the drawstring and yanked out a needle and thread, and under Zeshi's confused but intense eyes, he began to sew the wound shut. What are you doing? She asked as his bloody hands flew up and down in a constant undulating motion like a swimming serpent. Sewing the artery closed. Somehow she's not dead, if I can close this fast enough. Zeshi, take my sword, rub your hands on it fast enough to heat it like a glowing fire poker. He gave the command, and eminently confused, she carried out his instructions. Her hands closed over the flat of both sides of the blade and began to rub. Nothing happened at first, nothing at all, but gradually the metal warmed under her hands, the heat began to build and grow. She moved her arms faster and faster, but kept an eye on what Brain was doing. Then before she knew it, the metal was glowing red as a torch in the pitch darkness, and Brain's bloody hands stopped moving. It's done, she said, and pulled her hands away. Good, bring it here. He ordered, and she carried his blade to him. The skin was sewn shut but the gash beneath was clear. Slap the hot part on it, right here, Brain said, pointing to where the sutures held the wound more or less closed. He looked at the face of the unconscious girl. It's a good thing you're not awake, or this would hurt like hell, he said, and she did as he said, slapping the metal against the girl's skin. The sick smell of burning flesh rose up instantly as the hot metal connected with it, and Layali's unconscious body spasmed involuntarily in response to the pain. Brain leaned back with a sigh of relief, his hands caught him against the grass so that he leaned against the strength of his arms. That was something, he said. What was the point of all this? She asked, furrowing her black and white brow down at him, and then stabbing his sword into the soft ground before putting her hands on her hips. That's how you treat wounds when you've got no potions and no magic caster. Brain explained. She'll have that scar for the rest of her life, just like the other ones the potion couldn't get rid of, but if she doesn't die of shock from the burn, or blood loss from that wound, she'll survive. She's far tougher than she looks. His face turned pensive. What? She asked. Yeah. She is a lot tougher than she looks. Impossibly so. She should have drowned in that river, died of her head wound, gotten infected through her eye socket, been torn up inside from what Cerebrate did to everything. Not to mention the broken ribs, arm, And I've seen grown men die of that exact wound in a minute or two. Brain's mind raced. You think she's got a talent? She asked. It'd be the craziest talent I've ever heard of. But she's got no business being alive without it. The wounds certainly happen, but they just don't kill her. Maybe if we did nothing at all, she'd still survive if she just had time to heal. He shuddered. That sounds like some sort of personal hell. No amount of pain would end it. Maybe you're right. But on the other hand, she rubbed her chin in thought, she could do a lot with it, survive a lot. A lot of learning hurts, and potentially the process of learning things the hard way can lead to death. If she doesn't have to worry about that, Brain's face went pale all over again. Listen to me, Zeshi. If she survives this, if we're right, the wound wasn't as bad as she thought. It looked worse than it was. We stopped the bleeding and sealed the wound. Do you understand me? She has no power, she has no talent or gift, she's just a girl who got lucky more than once. Tell her nothing else. She looked down at the unconscious girl. She'd begun to breathe visibly, though still unconscious. The herb, if it weren't for that, maybe she'd already be awake. How does somebody just reject death that way? There was no clear answer. And the truth was, she knew without a doubt that if there was a reason, some way to know, she wouldn't be the one to find it. And as to Brain's instructions, he put a hand out to her, grasping her still burning hot hand as if it caused him no pain, even though it must have. Promise me. If a place like this learns about her survival of injuries like that, about her simply not dying, they'll tear her little body apart to find the answer. They'll torture her, not because they enjoy it, but because she's not human, so they don't care. All that will matter is finding out how to capture that talent in magic form. Do you understand me? She wanted to protest. But having seen the crop-eared slaves in the manor, having seen the way her own brother had his ears sawn off just to break his spirit, having seen the wounds on the girl herself, she had no room left for doubt. I won't say a thing. It wasn't as bad as she thought, she just had to be unconscious for you to help her. She promised, and meant every word. That finally allowed Brain's body to relax. He allowed himself to lie on his back with his arms and legs splayed out, the stink of blood finally noticeable in his nose. He said, You can't cook, I'm guessing? No, I can't. Raymond always did the cooking, she said, and Brain chuckled like a man half mad. Okay, I'm drained, so it's time you learned. Go grab the monster, chop him up with whatever is left of my damn sword. And I'll talk you through how to cook this one. Luckily enough, this particular monster is delicious if you know what you're doing. A little chewy, but a lot of flavor. Brain turned his head to the side, resting his cheek in the grass, and she went to follow his instructions, taking out his sword, and finding it largely reduced to slag. Great. Now I need a new sword. Oh well, worth it. He thought with indifference, and gave a genuine smile of relief to Zesh's back. Volume 7 C56. Kalki's tour of Nazarick was brought to an end only by the sudden delivery of a message. Allfather, the Theocracy Cardinal kept his word. I picked the letters up myself last night and have left them in the council chamber where we all last gathered. I sent a message to my homeland to send flying scouts over the southern border of the slain Theocracy as far as their coast. I'm about to meet with the Wolf Queen and have already spoken with the Golden Queen. If you intend to dispatch agents, you have the means to do so now without any repercussions that will hurt your kingdom. Naya's voice in his head was surprisingly firm, formal, a far cry from the passionate way in which she usually spoke, as if something troubled her enough to leave her reserved. He answered immediately. I was right to enter into a treaty with you, Queen of Frost. You are what I expected, through and through. My wife is with me, and we will return immediately. I will send my agents to investigate everything we can. Naya said nothing back, she simply killed the link between them, and that was that. He filed that away for later and looked at Kalka, who was sitting across from him at the table in the Nazarick bar, both hands on a cup of juice. Her sixth one, and a wild, joyful look on her face. Such flavor. How is it even possible for anything to be this good? She asked, even for a god. This is a bit much, she said, and while Albedo could only look smug, Kalka added, I'm only slightly exaggerating. Be that as it may, we have things to do. The Queen of Frost dispatched a telepathic message. It's time to send our agents south. Cardinal Raymond came through, and that means we have all we need to search for the queen. But also, we need to move on regardless. The road to our winter is long and we've already remained longer than intended. Ines pointed out, and the queen frowned only a little. It was more of a tiny pout wherein she understood the need to leave, but looked reluctantly at the juice. That portal, gate, you called it, we could be there immediately, she replied. Yes, but we would not be seen. And establishing the peace among our nations in the eyes of others will help establish their sense of security. Many of my subjects are former slaves from the Baharuth Empire, others are humans, others are heteromorphs. Seeing you pass through with me will quiet concerns in some quarters, Ines suggested, and Kalka reluctantly bowed her head. I know, but still. Who wants to leave paradise when they get there? She asked with a wink. That is why I am so reluctant to leave his bed, Albedo added, giving a taunting smile at the human queen. Unsurprisingly, Queen Kalka took it well, a sentiment I can readily understand. The experience was not what I expected. And then, as if to make a peace offering to the woman who ruled beside the Allfather, she added, I look forward to introducing my son to his sibling. The two halves of the Allfather will make for a remarkable team, like nothing this world has ever seen. Unable or unwilling to argue with the sentiment that praised her beloved, Albedo ended the verbal duel before it could truly begin by rising to her feet. Kalka finished her juice and set the cup down on the table and followed suit, and in turn Ines did the same. Gate, he cast the spell and the vortex appeared before them. They were gone a moment later, leaving the bar virtually empty again. Henry gasped for breath as she lay beside her husband, her limbs limp, almost jelly-like, her bosom heaving and slick, and Nfea wore a thoroughly happy look on his face and put his hands behind his head, sitting up on his pillow. He crossed one ankle over the other beneath the sheets. It's good to be the king, he said, and Henry turned her head to look at him with a sly little smile. Because you get to have sex with the queen? She asked in a voice that said that had better be the answer. He didn't disappoint her. Yes. So. What was that? It was. How? She gasped. A new invention. The Allfather's support for my potion research has been very generous, and while doing research into the alchemy needed to create a stamina potion using a simple chronomancy spell, the sort meant to make someone a few seconds faster, we accidentally... Husband. Skip the details. Henry reproved him, and he flushed a little red. Right, I'm sorry dear. Basically it adds stamina for that, in particular. It didn't do what I intended it to do, but I think this will be very well received. We'll have to retain a state monopoly on it though. If we do, I'll bet our treasury will never run dry. He smirked further, and Henry blushed, less than she used to, but still it was there. A very sensible idea. Wolf King, she said after drawing herself up to his ear. She nibbled at his earlobe and he chuckled just a little bit in return. Are you sure I should stay here? It would be a shame to let this just sit around. Nfea replied and held the bottle up and gave the white potion a shake. It had better just sit around while I'm gone, Henry laughed. I won't be gone very long at least. Before you know it I'll be home. Besides, somebody has to run the kingdom. I suppose, and I would miss out on my research too, Nfea said with some reluctance. I'll use a message scroll immediately if I get word about Queen Draudillan, but you know the slain theocracy will not be happy about this, even with Cardinal Raymond's blessing. You ran an alchemy shop, so field complaints like they're angry customers. Henry replied, you can do this, my love. They're not going to start a war over something their own side authorized us to do. Just prioritize the Queen's life overall and they can't complain. Now. How about one more round? The others are probably back by now and getting ready to go, and I don't want to be the only other queen with no heirs present or on the way when I get there. Nfea reached for the bottle. As you wish, my love, he said, but maybe have the baths made ready now so you won't be delayed too long? She rang the bell while he consumed the potion, and could barely restrain herself long enough to give orders to the maid before she could leap astride her husband one more time. Volume 7 C57. Henry stayed long enough to watch her goblin wolf riders racing away from where they formed up. The goblins were clad in their light armor, dark dragon skin leather with loose caps of the same material, with long thin lances at the ready. The wolves were the size of ponies, and their large pink tongues lolled out, panting as the wolf queen gave her orders. 10 across and 5 deep, they formed up in 10 squares, making for 500 in number. Their lances carried pennants showing her national flag to diminish the appearance of hostility at least some and give them a more parade-like appearance when they moved as groups. Henry, predictably enough, made her instructions brief, so then locate and secure the Draconic Queen, or if she is dead, her body, and return her to the safety of the international body, and, if you can, her mates as well. Save everyone you can. Raymond watched the order being given out by the Wolf Queen. Such an absurd name. For such a soft soul. He thought, and he should have held her in contempt for it. But he couldn't. Save everyone you can. That's the ideal we all began the priesthood with, that's the ideal we all chose to strive for when we trod the path of the scriptures, to become cardinals and lead the nation. It was a bitter draught to see a peasant in royal garb who could give such an insane order with a straight face. She meant every word, he could hear it from the very core of herself. When was the last time I sounded like that? He wondered while the liquor pounded against his brain, and he watched from his high place on the balcony of the hotel set aside for state visitors, but still apart from the nations that had, somehow, become so close that they were traveling companions. He put his hand to his head as if he could rub away his hangover. Years of flapping on about the good of humanity. How many villages like hers did we destroy in pursuit of the greater good? The destruction of the sunlight scripture, he knew, took place not far from here. At least I can say I told them that mission was a bad idea. We should have just killed the weak king and let them fall apart in the next invasion. That idiot Barbaro wouldn't have lasted a year. Raymond groaned at a particularly painful moment and watched the wolf-riding goblins raise their lances and cheer for their queen. The sound of hundreds of wolf paws slapping the stone was like the noise of steady rain, far different than the thunder of horse hooves, but even at a glance he knew for sure that those wolves would cause a bloody mess if they came up against opposing horsemen. Lying to Zesshi was for the greater good too. And for hers. But will she still see it that way? She has to know the truth by now. He asked himself that while hoping the opposite. Knowing her, she's sure to be on her way to our winter. Which means my best chance of finding her is to go that way myself. That wasn't the first time he'd thought it, and again he wondered if he was just trying to convince himself or not. If she went with that wanderer, who can say what she's doing? The gods know she'd get lost in her own house if she weren't careful. And naive, sheltered as she is. Gods, please hear my prayer. Raymond said and knelt to the empty air. He lowered his forehead to the floor and lay his hands on the floor with palms upturned above his head to receive their blessing. For all my life I've followed your teachings. Protected humanity. But now, I see a beast, a traitorous beast. And she sets demi-humans to save a human. She tells me that our humans are her people. And if she lies to me I cannot see it. I see a mere peasant turned queen, and she sends goblins to save peasants from the monster of the elf kingdom. And the girl I have known since I was a mere boy. I fear she is wounded in her heart and in pain. I fear the consequences of my lies, and that I will lose my friend, my comrade. Never in my life have I uttered a selfish prayer. I was given all the gifts I ever needed. Until now. Please. Tell me what to do. Give me words that will help her to understand. Strengthen my faith. Show me that I am deceived by a fever or a spell or the damned lies of a powerful mage. Show me I am not wrong. He shouted the end of his prayer into the floor as he prayed for wisdom and guidance. Outside, he could hear the clatter of carriages, and the cheers of humans and non-humans alike as the monarchs resumed their shared journey to our winter. They rolled past him moments later, but he couldn't see it. Not with his eyes closed and his head down. But if the gods gave any answer, he couldn't hear it. If they were listening, they gave him no sign. If they cared, it seemed they didn't know how to show it. Silence stretched, minute became minute until a full hour passed him by, until his body ached from the uncomfortable posture, and Cardinal Raymond rose up again. Our winter. He reminded himself as he put the failed prayer in his past and pushed himself to his feet. I can't do anything else here, whether the gods answer me or not. This is not the place I need to be. And with that, he went to make preparations to leave, uncertain about what he would find as he went on. As long as I find Zesshi, my Zesshi, I can live with almost anything else. He told himself, and hoped to the gods the trip wouldn't make him into a liar. Volume 7 C58. When Layali woke up, her first emotion was shock. I woke up? Was that a dream? She reached down to her inner thigh where the memory of the pain began. She felt the ridge of a burn mark and sat up with agonizing slowness. The soreness of the rest of her body was there, and when she looked down, there it was. It was dark around her, but the glow of the fire made it obvious. I was branded. He branded me? She thought with horror, and the rest of her memories began to return as the fog of sleep began to lift. No, something else. Why there? And she fell back into the cloak that separated her from the ground. The memory of the swordsman jumping over her, his sword piercing the water while she ripped the creature apart with her bare hands, returned in earnest. Rescued. They rescued me. Right, I got too close. The mark then? The burn mark where the tooth tore her open was different. She looked down the length of her right leg. She recognized sutures easily enough, and some places were wrapped in stinking bandages that smelled like the herbs she knew Brain carried. You're awake, she said from behind her, and Layali rose up to look. She sat munching on some pink, chewy-looking meat. A few feet away, Brain was sprawled out and snoring. Yes I am. What? My thigh? My injuries? Was it all real? Layali asked with wondering eyes while she's fingers picked at the food in her little wooden bowl. The heterochromatic half-elf nodded while she chewed on another bite. Yes, you've been asleep for the last 2 days. You weren't that badly hurt, but it did put a toxin in you that kept you unconscious for some time. Fortunately the monster was large enough that... Well, she held up a morsel between 2 fingers. Would you like a bite of him? She smirked, and Layali's stomach growled with violent agitation. The younger half-elf put her hand on her belly and sprang to her feet, then winced. Ow! She yelped, and her leg almost gave out. Be careful, you'll pop your stitches. Brain seemed to be pretty good at those, but I have no idea how to fix them if they pop. She explained, and Layali gave a tiny nod that ended up more as a wince. Yeah, I will, Layali said, and she stood up, approached her, and handed the girl the bowl herself. Eat up. There's plenty. Brain is a pretty decent field cook. I tried, but... she shrugged. He swore I was going to burn the water. Layali gave a weak smile at the weak joke, and plucked a fragment of the pink meat into her mouth. It was as chewy as it looked, but as she ground her teeth over it, the flesh began to dissolve and the flavor, savory and sweet, began to spread out over her tongue. She shoved several more pieces into her mouth, stuffing her cheeks like a chipmunk and saying, "Ish good." She went to the spit and cut a few more pieces of the tentacle free, dropping them into another bowl and reseating herself cross-legged on the grass. So, it wasn't that bad. I got real lucky then. That thing was going to kill me, Layali said, looking down at the remnants of the creature that now served as her food. Luck was with you, that's for sure. Maybe making up for the bad luck of meeting Cerebrate, so don't worry, you've got a lot more good luck due to you after that, she said. It was meant to be encouraging, but Layali began to tremble at the name and tears began to quietly run down her face. Please don't say his name. I don't want to think of him, of those days, Layali said in a tiny, broken voice. She looked down into her bowl. Sorry, she said abruptly. I'm not that used to talking to people. Till this trip I don't think I've spoken to anyone other than Raymond, the Black Scripture members or other cardinals for the last 30 or 40 years, maybe since I was younger than you. I don't really know much about being gentle with words. I'll try to be more careful. Layali sniffled a little and took another bite. She chewed on the stuff for several seconds before asking, was it hard to work with monsters? They're not monsters, she said, and Layali only looked back at her in turn. They're my comrades. I don't know, Senna is my friend, some of the others, I think. Raymond, the old man has been with me for a long time. She's mind whirled with possibilities. Old rumors came back to mind. The other runaways or the deserters or the washouts as they'd been derisively termed, warriors, casters, rangers and spies with scripture-level potential who ran away and quit. She recalled an old conversation with Senna, the Black Scripture captain after one went all the way through training and then just vanished on his first mission. Traitors and abandoners. Leaving you all with all the work, they really should be hunted down with more vigor and punished. She had said. Senna, with his loose dark hair cascading down his shoulders and his long spear on his shoulder, only shrugged. Some do that, but they're the crazy ones. She recalled her frown. Which? The deserters or the ones who chase them? Senna gave a slightly bitter laugh. Both, in a way. You wouldn't know because you only go out after monsters, but things get complicated out there in the field and on the regular missions. It's not always that simple. Yeah, we should follow orders and all, but the ones who can't? Nah, they got their reasons, and the only ones who really want to hunt those hard are the craziest of the crazies. You ask me, a lot more naps, screwing, feasting, and a lot less bloody and complicated missions to make everything a whole lot better for everyone. But, aren't you supposed to chase down a pair? Like a week ago? She asked, aghast. Yeah. Kirank and Shanda ran off on a mission and got sighted somewhere near the border. Gosh. I hope they haven't moved on. It would be a shame if they did and I couldn't pick up their trail again. I'll get right on it. After my vacation. Senna answered, and meandered off, leaving She scratching her head. When she set the memory aside, and found herself looking down at the patched-up little half-elf, Senna began to make a lot more sense. They're not monsters, they're just. They do what they know. Same as me. Only I guess I didn't, and don't, know much. She bit her lower lip as she acknowledged, with great reluctance, her own ignorance. But they do. Don't they? Layali pressed. They've gotta, to tell you what to do. It wasn't ever bad, working for most of them, some yes, and they kept those away from me. Raymond was my handler, and has been for more than 20 years, closer to 30, probably. I watched Senna go from a Godkin scrub to the rank of captain. I came up with Time Turner's code name. They wouldn't. She felt the words start to die on her tongue, act like cerebrate was what she'd intended to say. But what could she say when confronted with the proof of what they all defended? My brother's screams as they cut his ears. That's going to stay with me for a long time. And how many other siblings do I have out there? She wondered, and her mind staggered at the possibilities. Thank you for saving me, Layali said as the awkward silence stretched out. It's no trouble. Monsters like that are nothing but ants to me. She replied, then reaching into her bowl and finding that her fingers touched only emptiness and wet juices, she brought it up to her mouth and began to lick it clean. By the gods, that's good stuff. She licked her lips and went to slice off more pieces for herself, and when Layali moved closer to the roasting spit, she cut off a few pieces for her as well. So you're stronger than Brain by a whole lot, I guess? Layali asked when they sat back down again. Yes. If he's a hill, I'm a mountain. She answered it honestly, and glanced over at the swordless swordsman who snored obliviously a few feet away. Could I get that strong? Layali asked with a tentative and hopeful look when she raised her eyes like a pleading puppy dog. As him? Maybe. As me? No, I was born this way. She replied, and then said, but if you get as strong as him, there's not many you'd have to be afraid of. Who knows, maybe you even have a talent for some weapon or another and just don't know it yet. So, when I heal, can you maybe teach me a little? Layali asked, her eyes fluttered hopefully, and she answered immediately. I'll show you what I know, but be careful. More so than around water, I promise, Layali said with her hand over her heart, and resumed chewing with a smile on her face.